After Bangladesh and Nepal, Gen Z is now taking to the streets in Peru. Violence erupted in capital Lima as hundreds of young protesters opposed a new pension reform and demanded better wages and working conditions. Demonstrators are drawing support from unions, environmentalists and activist groups. The unrest comes amidst deepening political turmoil following the suspension of Attorney General Delia Espinoza, who had accused lawmakers, ministers and even President Dina Boluarte of corruption. Boluarte's approval ratings have plunged as organized crime and extortion rise in Peru. Her term ends next year, but the protests show no signs of slowing down. For Peru's young protesters, it's corruption, fear, and weak institutions driving the anger. After Nepal and Bangladesh, Peru is the latest flashpoint in a Gen Z wave of social unrest. And just a few weeks ago, the world saw how Gen Z toppled the government in Nepal in a matter of days. And now we have Dr. Amalendu Mishra, Professor of International Politics at Lancaster University, joining us live from Lancaster. Dr. Amalendu Mishra, thank you for being with us here on News9. Once upon a time across the Middle East, you saw a wave of protests across countries, one theme protests against government and the establishment. You saw it happening in one West Asian nation after another. This time around, the commonality, it is not geography, but the commonality is that it is the Gen Z rising against the establishment from as far as Asia to Latin America.
Hi, good afternoon. Indeed, that is really the case that we witness. In fact, the youth do not seem to have the same degree of patience like their fathers and parents' generations. The challenges that they face are different from the challenges that their parents were facing. That's the first point. And second one is that their patience is different from what the other generation would have experienced. Now, for instance, if you are writing a piece in a newspaper, for instance, I can give you my own example. They do not want a piece more than 800 words because beyond that, people don't have the patience to read through it. So the expectation, that is number one. Second, the patience is wearing thin. And third is the process of democratization. Most countries are democratic now than any given period in history. And given that there is a specific context which allows for protest, which allows for free speech, makes the Gen Z, as you rightly point out, take advantage of it. And the fourth most important factor that we haven't talked about, which is elephant in the room, is the communication. The ease of communication that we have experienced or we are experiencing at the moment is unprecedented. It would not have been possible 20 years down the line or 30 years behind. When I was writing an email, I had to wait for days to get a reply. But now everything is on social media. Within seconds, everyone is connected and people assemble. So that ease of contacting each other to vent your anger through the social media, then coming out onto the street, is something that facilitates as well. So first one is expectation, second one is impatience, third one is democratization, and the fourth one is social media. So these are the four factors that are bringing the Gen Z out into the street.
Gen Z are certainly out onto the streets. We're just talking about Nepal and Bangladesh. Similar kind of situation was also unfolded in Sri Lanka as well. It was the youth which took to the streets first, and you're seeing this. Do you see this as a product of what the global economy is going through, and that impacting especially developing nations, especially nations whose economies are severely impacted by the global constraints?
Well, indeed, I mean, economy is a big factor, so there is no hiding away from that very fact. But that doesn't necessarily respond to the question. We have demonstrations in United States. We have regular demonstrations in France, or kind of riots, in fact, in France. It's recurring. Britain, you had a couple of days back, we had a rally against immigration, illegal immigration in this country. So that shows that it is not just economy, but whatever is the issue for the moment or at the moment that kind of galvanizes a kind of public anger. So the expectation point that I made a little earlier is such that kind of links to that. For instance, if it is in the United States, it will be something to do with climate change, perhaps. If it is in France, it has to do with unemployment. And in developing countries, or let's say, for example, underdeveloped countries, it has mostly to do with corruption, it has mostly to do with economic challenges, and that's what we saw in Nepal, and economic challenges we saw in Sri Lanka. So the mismanagement, the expectation point that I made earlier is matched here. So we expect more from the government. We want the government to deliver.
Right.
And since the current generation has moved away from authoritarian rules, they are no longer prepared to accept what the leaders or the leadership is trying to provide them. They're not going to just sit there and take it.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Completely out of time here on the conversation. Dr. Amalendu Mishra, Professor of International Politics, Lancaster University, joining us live from Lancaster in the UK. Thank you for joining us here for that big story that we're tracking.